Hi, I'm Ned Helme. I'm the president of the Center for Clean Air Policy. And I'm sorry I can't be with you today in New Zealand. In fact, it's almost 100 degrees here, so I'd love to be there. But I'm here in Washington and really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about climate change policy here in the U.S. First, a word about the Center for Clean Air Policy. We're an environmental think tank based here in Washington. We also have offices in Beijing and in Sacramento and in Brussels. We work a lot with individual governments, sort of an insider advisor. So we do extensive efforts in China, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Europe, and of course here in California and in Washington. Our focus is really on economic instruments to move climate policy. So we're experts in emissions trading and the clean development mechanism, those kinds of things. We played a major role in the design of the EU's emissions trading system back in 1999 and 2000. Very proud of the success that's enjoyed. But today I'm going to talk to you more about Washington and the prospects for the new administration. And I know you had some questions, so I'll be happy to respond to those.
What is the international negotiating position of the U.S. on post-2012 climate policy likely to be during 2009-2010 under a new administration?
Well, I think we're going to see a big change and a very welcome change in U.S. policy. Both candidates, Mr. Obama and Mr. McCain, have been on record in favor of major cap-and-trade legislation to regulate all sectors of the U.S. economy. Mr. Obama has been for an 80% reduction below 2005 levels by 2050, and Mr. McCain for something slightly less than that. Both of them in favor of pretty significant reductions like we had in the legislation that was pending in the Senate, getting to 1990 levels by 2020. They also, as I mentioned, are really interested in the international side of things. So this is a big change from the Bush administration where they really want to engage in the UN process, they want to engage in the G8 and so on. So I think we'll expect to see quite a significant shift in the importance that's placed on international negotiations and on international results in this area.
What will a new administration be looking for from developing countries?
Developing country issue is a huge issue in the U.S., and the U.S. Congress in particular. I think, as I mentioned, both candidates are really good on the international front. But on this question, I think we're really going to need to see action by developing countries that is credible and accepted by the U.S. I mean, our Congress is very concerned about competitiveness issues, very concerned about China's rising influence in the world economy. And I think we're going to need to see something quite significant in terms of action by developing countries in this next round. Now, what that means in the U.S. context is we have the labor unions and some of the corporations are pushing very hard for what are like border tax adjustments, in effect, taxes on countries that don't have comparable climate change requirements. And I think that's a very counterproductive measure, but it's very likely to be a part of whatever comes forward from the U.S. I think what we're hopeful to see is some carrots that would encourage China to take more action, incentives for new technology and that sort of thing. And I think both candidates have shown an interest in that, but they will face the difficulties of the U.S. domestic situation in terms of developing country issues. So I would think between the two, Mr. Obama is probably going to be more susceptible to pressure on the labor front. Mr. McCain probably be more likely to resist the border tax adjustments, tax sort of steps, and more favorable to both of them would be favorable to the set of carrots, incentives for action by developing countries. On the forestry front, the big issue there is, do we include reductions in deforestation in the carbon market? It's too early to tell where each of these candidates will come down on an issue, but I think in the U.S. there's a bit of a resistance to buying reductions from developing countries. There's a suspicion of the CDM that's not typical in a lot of other countries around the world. So it's going to be, I would say, that you'll see the U.S. being less in favor of extensive trading opportunities with developing countries than perhaps the Clinton administration was at the time of Kyoto.
How will the timing of the U.S. election affect the international negotiations?
Well, one of the tough things in the U.S. is we have an election in November. The president takes office January 20th. And it takes a while for a new administration to put its key cabinet secretaries in place. So I think an optimistic scenario is a new president would have a proposal on climate change by April or May of 2009, which doesn't give us a lot of time for congressional action and a lot of time to fit into the Copenhagen process. So I think we face a real rush to try to get something in place for Copenhagen. So for the U.S. To play in the debate, I think we'll definitely be players, but I think it's going to be tough to finish the job by Copenhagen 2009. I think we're really talking about early 2010 probably to get the job done here. One factor that's important, if the Democrats were to win, and Mr. Obama wins and we get a larger Senate majority for the Democrats, that probably makes it a little easier in terms of the negotiations, because then you have the same parties at the table. We can have the Senate staff and members at the table in Copenhagen, and that'll make it a little easier. The unfortunate history on this issue is, Kyoto was agreed to by the Clinton administration without congressional involvement, and it made it almost impossible to get congressional approval after they'd agreed to the Kyoto Agreement. So this time around, either candidate is going to be inclined to get the deal done in the U.S. first and then take that deal to Copenhagen or to the process beyond Copenhagen. So I think it could be done by Copenhagen, but it will be really fast if we do it that fast. I think it's more likely that we get some signals, we get some things done, but we probably can't get the final agreement in December of 2009. My hope would be that the negotiations could get the architecture issues, how will developing countries play, what kinds of provisions for deforestation, what kinds of provisions for the CDM defined in 2008 at Poznan, and then in 2009 we really talk about what the targets should be for Annex 1 countries, what the targets or the effort level we want from developing countries would be, and that could play out in 2009. If, on the other hand, we wait in the negotiations to even start on the architecture until 2009, I think it really makes it difficult to get it done, and I think it's unfortunate, the timing of the U.S. election and so on, but we're finally here. It's been 8 years, and we now have an administration that's really on board. So very good news. And if we have to wait until the spring of 2010, I don't think that's the end of the world. We'd be very pleased with the kind of results we'll get. Both these candidates are going to be great in terms of the level of reductions they're going to want and the level of aggressiveness they're going to pursue. So I think that's very good news for the international process.